So we are due really next month to get a lot of Brexit news. Not only, of course, are we going to be seeing the renegotiation, or I say renegotiation, but more the meetings, shall we say, at the EU UK summit that is going to take place next May. In that regard, so that is going to be sort of quite interesting. We're going to see what happens on there. There's a lot of stuff being said, but I've always said, the EU is annoyed that, quote, Starmer won't say anything public. I've said before why he won't say anything public, because, hey, he doesn't have to say anything or what he wants till he actually, enters the room. However, some interesting news on this to give it that fact. But we've also got the metallurgy and meteorology bill. I know, doesn't sound the most Brexit thing ever. However, in that bill, it basically says, hey, if UK companies want to follow, EU law and regulations, which, guess what? The vast majority of them do want to do that, then they've said, we as the UK government will continue with that law and those regulations. Basically meaning that bill basically pretty much not 100%, but probably about by 80% aligns us with a lot of EU law and regulation. Trust me, when that comes up, I can guarantee you the Brexiteers are going to be crying like children, but they have had nothing to say about it because, well, it barely mentions Brexit. It's not like, the UK businesses aligns with Europe bill, so they can't really cry and moan about it. I'm very surprised if they actually know anything about it, to be honest. But hey, it's a good piece of disguise, right? Slipping in some, pro EU legislation under a completely different name. Hey, credit where credit's due, right? But, however, there are two people moaning already about Brexit betrayal before it even starts, trying to sort of build up the music of this whole meeting that's going to happen in May. Is just going to be a big Brexit betrayal. And of course, who is it? Well, it's the usual suspect. It's none other than, of course, Frost, the guy who pretty much left us with this absolute, well, who negotiated with this absolute awful deal. And of course, Boris Johnson, just for, the laughs, of course. But before we get more into this, please do remember to click on the like, share, and subscribe button down below. There are links to my Patreon page, the Buy Me Coffee link, the YouTube thank you button, and of course, as always, there's the Pony Club as well. So let's crack on then into this, coming from the New European. The title, The Sweet Sound of Brexit Betrayal. So, has this government any idea of how to do negotiations? This was the question posed on the 8th of April by the member of the House of Lords, alarmed by the right-wing website's claim of an imminent major Brexit betrayal by Keir Starmer. First of all, we know who this is. This is Frost, if you don't know this. And then, what's shocking is the website he is citing. He is citing Guido Fawkes. So if you don't know Guido Fawkes, congratulations. Allow me to, unfortunately, heap this knowledge upon you. Guido Fawkes is a blog that is run by a guy called Paul Staines, who basically, if Keir Starmer went walking out one day and to accidentally, I don't know, step on an ant, he would be the first one to report about how this ant was really this capitalist go-getter of an ant who was like, pro free speech, and Starmer has just crushed this poor ant with his Marxist heel on his shoe. That's the kind of guy this guy is. That's the kind of article he would write. Kind of funny that we still do get a lot of right-wing papers talking about how Starmer is this massive Marxist, but on the left, they turn around and just go, well, Starmer's just a blue Tory. Again, I'll leave you to elucidate on that little thought. Anyway, The peer was, of course, very furious after Guido Fawkes reported that Starmer's Brexit reset deal would be finalised at the UK European Summit on May the 19th and would include agreements on fishing rights with a youth mobility scheme. These have, of course, long been regarded in Brussels as red lines, and therefore stumbling blocks for British ambitions and easing of the red tape strangling Britain since we officially left the EU. He continued, saying that all these things the EU wants, and we should be now getting something in return for, our hero moaned. It was a take that missed two very important things. First, that we obviously are getting something in return. Inclusion in a lucrative and important trade and security pact with other EU nations, and also an agreement on alignment with the EU USPS, the Sanitary and phytosanitary standards that will now ease burden on lots of businesses. The second, of course, because the person asking, quote, has this government any idea of how to negotiate, was, of course, none other than David Frost, the man who negotiated the botched Boris Johnson Brexit trade deal that then piled those burdens on businesses in the very first place, helping now to collapse trade with the EU. You know? Oh, oh, Brexit, the uh, the irony that piles upon irony of the people who were so pro Brexit every single time and moment. Fuck, what a good option. So, this, of course, skilled negotiator is also now managed to break his promises, of course, on Northern Ireland, shun membership of the Horizon Horizon Science, the Horizon Science Program, and of course, work with tens of thousands of millions of UK researchers, shaft musicians, and other performers now keen to tour in Europe, and ignore massively, of course, the viable financial sector services altogether. Being, of course, bad at negotiations, called Bad at Negotiations by David Frost, is like being called useless by Kimmy Badnock, or slimy by Tim Rice, or frog-faced by Nigel Farage. It is like Liz Truss criticizing Starmer for losing control, or eight-time dad offering Starmer his thoughts on successful parenting, or even Donald Trump telling everyone else that they know nothing about tariffs. Yeah, indeed. This, continuing thing of what you've going on here is, if I was Starmer, I would not be afraid at this moment in time. I think the fact you've had all this stuff going on with Donald Trump, I think it's a shame we haven't got any sort of recent data, but I would love to see, like, poll numbers now of, like, what the UK public would want in a, shall we say, a deal with the EU. I can guarantee you those wanting maybe a closer relationship with the EU, I would suspect in the past couple of weeks probably gone up by about even 10, maybe 15 points. Dare I even dream 20 points? But I think that's a bit too far. I think 10 is certainly, I think, very reasonable. 15 maybe at a push, but I would not be surprised to, well, see if we get any polling data in the next couple of weeks. There isn't, unfortunately, most of that data comes, of course, from the start of this year. Doesn't include a lot of the stuff that we've seen going on, of course, because of America. Thank you very much, Donald Trump, on that one. But it is interesting to sort of think that once again, these people are crying Brexit betrayal when they left this absolute mess to deal with. And if you remember going back, one of the things they were so worried about, especially those pro Brexiteers, the big, Brexit fanatics, were worried about losing this election because obviously this is the time that, these meetings happen. This is when potential, we could sign up to stuff or maybe talk about, renegotiating of stuff or, all kinds of stuff that they did not want to do because they just weren't interested in pursuing it. As far as they were concerned, you've done the Windsor Framework Agreement. We don't need to do anything else. We'll see you again in another, 5, maybe 10 years, whenever renegotiations or talks come up again for a topic of subject. That's ideally what they wanted, and they know it. They know that because they lost the last election, they've lost a lot of power, they've lost a heck of a lot of influence. But Now all they can do is just scream and shout Brexit betrayal. And it's very, very interesting that barely any other right-wing news source really picked it up, bar, of course, the Guido Fawkes. Tells you quite a lot, really, especially when they were gloating recently, especially Express was really gloating about the fact that Gina Miller has shut down her party. And you're like, oh no, Gina Miller shut down her party, and somehow that means that the Ramonas have lost. If you heard what Gina Miller actually said, she'd actually been quite buoyed by some of the recent stuff, and she said she didn't think that her party was needed anymore any longer. You know, I think she's going to join. I think the Lib Dems. I believe. Don't quote me on that, but I think that's what she did, or at least I think that's what she suspects. I think she might very well do in the coming months. But you know, weird time indeed. But trust me, we are about to get a lot of Brexit news, and especially this week when it's been full of news of Donald Trump. And I am sorry, but as I always said, you know, when he won, there are times that Donald Trump is going to do stuff that we are going to have to talk about. And unfortunately, that tariff chaos around the world, well, he's winking and nudging that those tariffs might be coming back. So we might have to talk about that again. Alas, only so many hours of the day to make videos, as they say. But as always, thank you very much for watching. And of course, as always, we'll see you all next time.